Todd Howard and Bethesda Game Studios have finally given us an in-depth look at Starfield through a 15-minute gameplay and story reveal. And what better way to celebrate this first look than to break down everything we've been shown so far. So, the trailer obviously starts off showing us a star map, the very same star map that we've seen heavily featured in most Starfield media so far. And yes, this is actually a map of the stars we will be able to visit in the game, but I'll get into that later in the video. Todd Howard then fills us in on the footage that we see next, where we'll be seeing gameplay taking place on a moon called Crete. We see some very alien-looking surroundings with strange flora and rock formations, and we even see the in-game date, being May 7th, 2330. This is something that we might see every time we land on a planet because of an apparent day and night cycle which we can see on the HUD after we've switched to the first-person perspective inside the ship. This icon also looks like a compass, together with what looks like a meter for oxygen, suggesting that you will need to keep an eye on how much oxygen you have left as a survival mechanic. As we look to the right side, we can see our health and the status of our weapons and eventual grenades. And already I have to say that the HUD looks very clean and unintrusive, which is very appreciated. We also get a better look at our first robot companion, Vasco, who steps out of the ship first to survey the landscape. Vasco has been mentioned before to be a companion that can both carry your stuff and supposedly fight for you. I would assume that you have to tell him to follow you if you need him to come with you, just like you have to tell your companions in other Bethesda games to either stay in one spot or to follow. We then get to see our first side activity in the game, which reminded me surprisingly a lot about No Man's Sky: scanning. And to the left, we can see how many resources we have collected on one planet, as it says Crete just above this information. Scan range seems to suggest at what range you have to be in to scan a certain thing, and current biome could stand for how much biological material is present. To the right we can see the name of the flora, as here it says Dust Root, which is just 13% completed, meaning you have to find several more of these to complete it. What you get for completing these collections is unknown as of now, but the most obvious guess is XP or credits or any other reward. Looking at the bottom, we can see that there are several key interactions you can access through the scanner. You can choose to scan whatever you're looking at by pressing A. Pressing X for Outpost 30 could suggest that you use resources to find the closest outpost. RB activates photo mode, and the right stick toggles a guide that presumably helps you getting to your next objective. While making our way through the landscape, it's pretty apparent that the new Creation Engine 2.0 does a pretty tremendous job at rendering the environment, as we can see details very far away towards the horizon. Then we also meet our first alien lifeforms resembling some form of crab. And further along, we encounter something called a Crete Stalker that runs away with its group. So it seems like the alien life doesn't always have to be instantly hostile. As the player proceeds, we get another look at the scanning mechanic, and this time the material type is iron, with the atomic number Fe to describe it. This is also where we again see another likeness to No Man's Sky, that being the mining laser called a cutter that the player pulls out. And as the player keeps mining, we see the iron getting added to your inventory up at the right corner. As the player proceeds to the large facility that we saw before, we see that you're rewarded with XP when discovering new locations. Scanning the ship that stands just outside shows us that it's called a Crimson Fleet Ghost, and Vasco informs us via comms that these are pirates.
It would appear that pirates of the Crimson Fleet are using the facility.
Now both the outpost and the pirate ship shows us that the so-called NASA punk look that Bethesda coined can be seen everywhere, as this already looks very NASA themed. As the player switches back to first-person mode, we also get our first look at the weapons wheel, which seems to have 3 slots for each weapon type, or maybe even 12 slots that you can freely use for whatever weapons you want. Now what I'm really curious about is whether the player could have entered the pirate ship and just stole it right away, since it's just standing there completely open. It would make sense considering another thing that we see later in this breakdown. More on that later though. We make our way into the outpost and ambush a few pirates, and just like expected, you get XP from killing them. And in ordinary Bethesda fashion, we quickly get a glimpse at the loot and transfer screen that pops up on bodies. Now looking at the combat, it doesn't seem awfully bloody, at least not at this point in the game. Explosions don't seem to destroy body parts in gory fashion, which most of us are pretty used to when it comes to Bethesda games. This could have been tuned down for the gameplay reveal though, and it's possible that we can change this in the settings. On the positive side, however, the Creation Engine 2.0 seems to feature a more advanced ragdoll system because it looks like your enemies are falling a little bit more realistically than in other Bethesda titles. We then get a first look at the lockpicking system, and here you'll have to put missing data into the correct order in order to complete a circle, which then promptly unlocks whatever you're lockpicking. Behind the weapons crate, we can see some strange alien creature, but chances are that this is just one of those environmental decors that we'll see a lot throughout the game. As the player goes outside, another fight takes place, and this time we see the Equinox rifle being used, which seems like a sort of plasma or laser weapon. And yes, shooting at your enemy's oxygen tanks makes them take off like exploding jetpacks. We then see that Starfield will give us more maneuverability than ever before, as you now have a boost function that can take you across gaps. We then make our way to New Atlantis, which is the capital city where the Constellation group of space explorers are located. Here we get our first look at a major hub, and New Atlantis looks really cool indeed. We see NPCs in all kinds of shapes and sizes, guards that patrol the city, and lots of pretty vegetation. Now, before we get introduced to the people of Constellation, we got our first look at the Chronomark wristwatch, which may or may not be a collector's edition item that you'll get with the game. And this smartwatch looks like it would work sort of like the Pip-Boy from Fallout. Now we also get our first close-ups of different NPCs, and yes, while the animation looks a little janky, the textures and the fidelity just looks really good compared to previous Bethesda titles. We also get some narration from this mysterious woman who also narrated the first trailer, and it's pretty obvious that the game will mostly focus on a story of exploration and mystery. We then see the aforementioned day and night cycle at play, as the player looks up at the night sky and we see, well, a field of stars. The lady continues to narrate and we see pieces of what looks like alien technology, and then continues to imply that we're the ones who first encounters these artifacts and then brings them to Constellation. This is reinforced by two other individuals that we meet, as one of them, this guy, mentions visions that we'll inevitably come to see. We then get showcased different environments, some that we've seen mentioned before and some new ones. There's Aquila, the city of the Freestar Collective, a sandy-looking planet, a tropical environment, and even the cyberpunk-inspired city known as Neon, which is the home of Ryujin Industries, a big cyber corporation. We also see a bunch of vendor-looking NPCs in Aquila, which suggests that we'll encounter lots of vendors throughout the different cities in the game. We then listen to this creepy-looking guy who could also be a vendor, and he apparently has some form of plot relevance. The pretty narration lady then implies that we'll have to choose a faction sooner or later, some of these examples being the United Colonies, the Freestar Collective, and the Crimson Fleet, which everyone seems to hate. Now, one of the more interesting parts of the trailer is this bit right here, where we can see the player shooting in 0G. This is something we keep seeing in small portions throughout the trailer, and considering we'll have a boost function, shooting while floating mid-air could turn out to be a lot of fun. Again, we see different alien lifeforms that are hostile, one of these being an extremely horrifying spider creature. The question here is if these creatures will be handcrafted or if they're procedurally generated. Then we cut back to the narration lady, and it's becoming obvious that she's probably the leader of the Constellation, or at least a mentor of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
We then cut to some form of mining operation as two characters are putting on equipment for some mission that's probably connected to the main story. After a scene displaying a giant crystal cave, we're then shown a room with old space exploration equipment, drop pods, and even an old satellite. The trailer spins on, and we see our first alien dinosaur-looking thing with a giant horn and what looks like plate armor. This scene shows us some form of alien ruins, and then our character walking towards another really strange artifact that's sort of reminiscent of the spinning rings inside the mass relays in Mass Effect. Todd then has us go from the story and general gameplay to the character creation, and here we find out that this system is the most flexible Bethesda has created yet. You seem to choose your basic presets to build off of, and as we can see together with Todd's narration, we will be able to customize almost exactly how our character looks, from body size to skin tone and even your walk styles. You can see the rings here representing different body parts you can change in size, and the dots are the ones you move accordingly to change the appearance of your character. We can see on the face menu as well that there's going to be a lot of options to choose from, but there doesn't seem to be a tool like the body shaping one in order to change the shape of your face. But maybe that's something that they could add now that the game has been delayed to 2023. After picking what your character looks like, you can then choose a background, and to the right here we can see the names of them. There's, for example, the chef background, and here we see that the 3 skills you get are the ability to create special foods and drinks, your melee weapons do 10% more damage, and it seems like you get a permanent bonus of 30 health. Then there's the cyberneticist, which seems to give you a bonus to technology like robots and turrets as well as laser weapons, together with a bonus to your medpack healing. The ones that I'm personally curious about are the bounty hunter and the ronin, and I would assume that their skills are entirely combat oriented. It even seems like the choice of background will get mentioned throughout the game every now and then, as the player here chooses to be a diplomat, and this guy right here takes it up in conversation.
Says here you spent some time as a diplomat. Having a way with words might prove useful.
We then cut to see the traits you can choose, which seems to be like perks from the Fallout series. Here we see that they've picked Introvert as one of the 3 slots, which gives you more endurance when out alone and less endurance when you have companions with you. There's several other options that give you many different perks, and as mentioned, you can choose up to 3 perks at a time. Then we get a little showcase of different ways your character can look, which then cuts over to the skills menu. And just like other Bethesda titles, these skills get stronger the more you use them by unlocking different ranks. We then get a first look at the crafting bench, and we can see to the left that you can craft weapons, armor and clothes, settlement and house building, and foods, drinks and potions. As per Bethesda standard, weapons can be equipped with mods to increase their effectiveness like we see here. Then we see a bunch of fighting with hostile alien life on different worlds, which also showcases a futuristic assault rifle called the AR-99. Todd then proceeds to show us how we can create our own outposts, which seems to be like a combination of No Man's Sky's base building and Fallout's settlement system. We will also be able to hire different people to stay at the outpost and keep it functional, which is neat. Now, one of the biggest things about this announcement is the reveal that we can actually build our own ship. This was something that I personally didn't expect at all, so it's a pretty great surprise to be honest. There seems to be a lot of varying ways that you can customize the ship too, and you can even pick your own crew. Looking to the left here in the shipbuilding menu, we can see how different parts affect the performance of the ship, and up to the right we can see how much it will cost us to add parts or sell them off. Each ship part seems to give your ship a form of bonus, so they're all functional and not just for aesthetics. And I agree, Todd, this does look super cool.
I have to say, it's so cool, we just absolutely love this.
Todd then reiterates that the performance is really important since we're going to fly around in it. This was also something that lots of people were very concerned about since there has been no real information on this except some relatively recent leaks. But it looks like some of these were correct, as we will indeed control our ships fully. Speaking of leaks, there was one that spoke of space combat and flying that just wasn't fun. But I'm not gonna lie, this looks like tons of fun, even more so than the regular ground combat we saw before. Sound effects are crisp but still a little subdued to give a small sense of realism. The exploding ships and debris are really cool and I just really like it. The HUD looks like it could be complicated to some people however, but it seems like we'll have our ship stats down here to the left. We can also see how much ammunition we have left for each weapon the ship has equipped, and to the left and right we can see the speed you're going and how much boost you're using. Now I wonder how we're supposed to loot the ships that we've destroyed. Is it gonna be like No Man's Sky where the loot automatically gets collected, or are we actually gonna have to go outside the ship and collect it? Anyway, we then cut to different ships being flown in space, showcasing the beauty of the new creation engine. And it does look really nice as we zoom past asteroids and space stations. We also get a small glimpse on the docking mechanic, and I would assume that this will mostly be used when visiting friendly ships or stations. But since it shows off combat in between, we could also assume that we're gonna be able to board ships like real pirates. Now here comes the bombshell. Todd and Bethesda have been pretty candid on how big the game will be, and most of us probably assumed that you would jump from system to system so we could explore selected parts of different handcrafted planets. But nope, Todd just revealed to us that every planet will be fully explorable. Yes, that is quite insane, is what you'd think at first. Now, while my mind was blown during the presentation, after thinking about it, it's not that complicated after all. You see, Bethesda presumably has to use procedural generation just like No Man's Sky to accomplish this. It's just simply too big, even for a team of 1,000 people to handcraft even one planet. And according to Todd, there's hundreds of systems we can travel between, which means thousands of planets to explore. So yeah, Bethesda will have handcrafted cities and zones on a handful of these planets, but the rest of each planet will have to be procedurally generated. And there's nothing really wrong with that. Procedural generation is a great idea for when you want to make your game feel enormous, and I think this will be like an added bonus to an already massive handcrafted experience. Meaning you won't have to explore a bunch of procedurally generated planets if you don't want to. Speaking of exploring planets, we can see here that you can scan the planet before landing, so you'll know whether it has life on it, and if there's water and what sort of gravity it has. Now, a cool thing that I noticed was that there is indeed a galaxy map, and while I don't think that this is meant as a nod to Mass Effect, it's still lovely to see something that reminds me that little bit extra about one of my favorite franchises of all time. Now, before I end the video, I just want to thank you for watching, and in the future I will be covering much more Starfield content. So if you want more of this, remember to subscribe. Thank you to all my members, and I'll see you in the Starfield. MrHulthen signing out.